Good morning and welcome to the Leadership and Insurance Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Bonds, and I'm very lucky to be joined by Taylor Perkins of Slope Software. Taylor, how are you?
Doing great. How about yourself?
Yeah, no, very good, very good. I'm actually bathed in natural sunlight for once, which is a very rare thing in the UK. So it's quite exciting to sort of be side lit from a window angle. But welcome to the podcast and thank you for taking the time. It's been a little while coming, this one. We've been trying to get this one to go, and I've been looking forward to it. But before I make a hash of introducing Slope Software, perhaps you'd be kind enough to introduce what it is you guys do.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. So I'm Taylor Perkins, CTO and co-founder of Slope Software. We were founded back in 2016, and we offer what's called an actuarial modeling platform, which, the basic idea or the value proposition here is that it helps insurance companies understand and quantify their risk so that they can make better decisions about their business. And this can be a very difficult thing for particularly long tail insurance contracts that take a long time. So, making a mistake now could have an impact for 30 years. So it's a very important market, and that's why we market specifically to actuaries who are sort of the experts in the industry and support these processes within insurance companies. So we were founded in 2016. We went through the MetLife Digital Accelerator powered by Techstars in 2019, and then we raised a seed round from Co-Founders Capital in January of 2020. And we are just about to close another round, about $2 million in the next couple of weeks. So by the time this podcast is out,
awesome.
That'll be announced.
Well, the time it'll be out, there'll be money in the bank. That'd be good.
That's right.
So that's quite interesting, the kind of gestation period of the business. And I sort of wanted to go back on that, actually. So you founded in 2016, but obviously going through Techstars 2019, raising some money in 2020. Is that because you managed to get revenue in the door beforehand? Have you been bootstrapping to that point? Just interested to know the kind of, the gap between inception and raising money. Was that a sort of decision that you made at the outset, or was it more kind of you needed to get to a point where you could raise money and you needed, some revenue in the door first?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So there's sort of a couple of reasons why we were almost sort of incubating for a couple of years. One is we knew that in order to approach this market, we needed to already have a deep product when we came to market. So you'll see a lot of times in startup world that companies will start on an idea and raise money and then start building their product. We couldn't do that. There was just no way that we could enter the market with no product or very little product. So we actually worked nights and weekends for 2.5 years before we finally quit our jobs to go full time. So at that point, we had already had a pretty reasonably deep product at that point. We raised a friends and family round to get us through. And we supplemented with some consulting income. So we kind of bootstrapped originally. And then we really feel like we officially launched the product in early 2019. And that's really when we started to sign on customers and really see some traction. And that traction is then what got us into the Techstars program. And then, we're continuing to grow today, and the product gets deeper and deeper. But, again, I think the main reason was just knowing how much of a product we needed to have initially in order to go to market at all.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. And I remember that's something we touched on when we had a previous call, was that, and I wanted to ask you this, and what are the kind of unique challenges for you guys? Because you're dealing with an industry, because it's specific for life actuarial modeling. Is that correct, or is it broader than that?
Yeah, so our initial target market is the life, annuity, and pension spaces.
Right.
So all sort of long duration contracts. And that's mostly because they're all modeled pretty similarly.
Yeah.
We can also do long duration corporate modeling and things like that. That's our initial focus, although we've built the platform to be able to support the other lines of business in the future. But yeah, it definitely presents some interesting unique problems, being that these people think in decades. A life insurance contract is a 30-year contract potentially, and so it becomes, there's a couple of problems with that, right? One is getting people to move technologies can be difficult because they're thinking in longer term. The other difficulty is actually demonstrating the ROI of a platform like this. So if we tell insurance companies, look, you can better price your products with our platform, and the issue is that may take 10 or 20 years for them to realize. And so, being a little bit newer in the space, we've been around for 5 years. So, even if we had somebody that started right away, they may still not be seeing the ROI on our platform yet. So we have a lot of other demonstrable ROIs in terms of process improvement and things like that. And just being able to get sort of an all-in-one platform so that the manual labor is reduced for actuaries, which is very demonstrable on its own. But the harder one is to explain how that improves the business in the long term, because it's just hard to demonstrate that until 30 years have passed.
Yeah, no, exactly. Because your co-founder's an actuary, isn't he? Is it Andy?
That's correct.
Yeah. How do you? I've got to go back to something as well, which I let slide, and was like, so you spent evenings and weekends working on an actuarial modeling software.
Yeah, it takes a certain kind of drive, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. But how did you? Do you guys know each other personally from before, or how did that come about, that team?
Yeah, actually, so this is an interesting one. So he is my former brother-in-law, and so we knew each other. I've known him since high school, and so we've known each other a long time. And the company was founded via text message. He sent me a text message one day, and I actually have the original one saved. And he said, "Hey, I have this crazy idea. It's grown out of frustration with work. I keep waiting for better software to come along, and it hasn't. And this market is just very terrible. What do you think about building something better?"
Yeah.
And I think I had a one-word response that said, "Absolutely."
Yeah.
And so we met. I took a week off of work, and we met and sort of hashed out ideas for the company, and we're in agreement and started working on it in actually late 2015 before we incorporated. So
yeah, I think it's always just the best genesis of solve a problem that you can see, and you keep waiting for the solution. It's not there. And we had the guys from Hyper Exponential on here in the UK, and they've got it's an actuarial modeling platform. And
yep, I'm familiar with them.
Yeah. So same story, right? They're just like kept waiting for someone to build better software. It wasn't coming, so we had to go and build it ourselves. It seems the best solution. But your background's not in the insurance industry per se, is it? You're from outside. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair. I have a little bit of insurance industry early on in my career. I helped build things out for a health insurance market, so the sort of sales process. And I had a lot of involvement when they were implementing healthcare.gov, so all the integrations with health insurance providers. But life insurance is a little different, and so that space is interesting.
The reason I kind of wanted to kind of highlight your external experience outside the insurance industry was just to talk about the dreaded word innovation. And really what I want to talk about is tech stacks and tech innovation, and because you'll have a broader world view. People love talking about innovation in insurance, and I think a lot of the time, this is personally my view, and I don't want us to shape any part of the conversation, but I see a lot more adoption than true innovation. There's things that have worked in other industries, and we're bringing them in, and that is a form of innovation. That's fine, but do you think that's accurate in your view, or are we just or is that might be unfair as well, because it might be most industries just adopt new things? But I don't know. I wanted to get your take on kind of what you see as genuine innovation, and if you see much of it in the insurance industry.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So I guess my initial answer would be it depends where you look in the industry. So there's certainly, the insurance industry is quite large, and so depending on different aspects, whether or not it's consumer-facing products or more B2B type products. I think you see sort of different levels of innovation versus adoption. For example, I think we're seeing a lot of insurtech startups being very successful right now on the consumer side that are really modernizing. They're bringing new types of insurance to the market, or they're bringing it using new technology platforms, and that is gaining a lot of traction. I mean, if you think of companies like, just to name a few, Lemonade, Kin, Bestow, Ladder Life, you probably just saw in the news, Ethos Life just raised $200 million. So that, they're doing great. And even Tesla now is getting into the auto insurance space and just started hiring actuaries as well. So I think there's a lot of innovation going on that side, and just mostly from a technology perspective. On the B2B side, I think it depends a little bit where you look. In general, I feel like we're seeing more innovation on the P&C side. And I think the part of the reason for that is, P&C contracts are much shorter. And so they can iterate on things and try new technologies without sort of this long tail risk factor, right?
Sure.
And so, I think compared to a company like us, where we're coming in and essentially unseating these large incumbents that have been around since the 80s. There's a little bit more friction up front, but I think when people see the value, I mean, that's how long it's been since there's been real innovation on our side of the house, and it's time, right? It's pretty easy to show the opportunity there when people see the modern technology and what it can do. One other comment on I'll say on the innovation in the insurance industry is, I think a lot of insurance companies are trying to innovate, and they're even creating whole innovation teams. Like we worked with the innovation team at MetLife, for example, when we went through the accelerator there. And I think, in my experience, having talked with some of these teams across various organizations, I think the people that are in those departments are really excited about innovation. But a lot of the times what we see in practice is they get a little bit hamstrung or handcuffed a little bit in terms of what they can actually accomplish within the organization. And they're doing a little bit more of trying to push POCs and pilots on other parts of the business. And it's less driven from those business units themselves, which has mixed results, I would say.
I think you've touched on two really interesting points there. Actually, there's one, I give myself a smack on the wrist for keep doing this thing of going insurance and then trying to make a statement across the whole industry, which is of course impossible because it's so broad. But
right.
I think you made a really interesting point about the life cycle of the insurance contracts, and it sort of, it follows, doesn't it, that the consumer lifecycle insurance contracts, particularly on kind of personal lines, is very short. P&C is a little bit longer. Things like life are obviously so much longer, and the innovation would follow that, because you can iterate as fast as you can issue kind of new contracts, essentially, because you don't have to disrupt something which already exists. So absolutely echoes kind of what I'm seeing. The second point, the innovation teams. I was having this conversation with a client recently and just saying that, they can be quite toothless, and it's no fault of the people within them. The people within them are great, and a lot of the time we're hiring the right people. But there seems to be so many inherent problems. Either they don't have any budget to do anything, they sort of have to operate out their own silos, or they have to convince kind of like P&L heads to kind of put some money in the pot to kind of drive innovation. And it doesn't have the necessarily buy-in from the teams or business units, because it's a sort of outside team that has, it's not connected to the claims team or the underwriting team or the actuarial team. So they're sort of trying to sort of get these POCs going, but they don't have the kind of groundswell of support. And we were sort of talking about, the juxtaposition of that, because if you flipped it and said, okay, let's take someone from each business unit to come and sit in the innovation team, you might not have the right people in the room. You might have the supporters there, but then you don't have that kind of, maybe that innovative mindset or external view to sort of bring in that new technology mind. So it's not an easy challenge at all.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's certainly a difficult problem to solve, and I can't claim to know what the right answer is. But I think the issue, at least in my view, is that there has to be buy-in across the whole organization.
Sure.
So it's one thing to even give an innovation team budget and say, "Hey, go do pilots with startups," and that's great. But at the end of the day, that pilot's going to end. And if the startup has shown value, then having a process in place to transition from a pilot to a full MSA, so that startup technology can actually be implemented in the organization. And I think there's a little bit of a gap there oftentimes. And it's a difficult problem to solve, right? Because these are very large organizations. And, I think getting that sort of innovation initiative to be company-wide can be difficult.
And I hear so many horror stories as well, particularly with smaller startups. You don't have infinite resources and infinite time and cash. And one of the things that you burn through is your time. And, you're going through these pilots or proof of concepts. And what the nightmare that I keep feeling feeds into this conversation, which is they'll do the pilot and the pilot will deliver well against the metrics which were discussed at the outset. Yet that it doesn't get picked up and it doesn't get utilized. And then you kind of think, not what was the point, because it's kind of all valuable. You can prove that, we took on this project, we ran this data and we got the result. But it seems a bit disingenuous sometimes to even start these processes because the support simply isn't there to implement it. And absolutely, I make no claim to know what to do. It seems to be about the leadership of those organizations and how invested they are in kind of making changes. And if it comes top down and really from the C-suite, then perhaps it gets done. But I suppose I won't step outside of my purview and try and solve problems that I don't know how to solve.
Yeah, and from a startup perspective as well, this is a dangerous place to be, and it's something that you as a startup founder we're keenly aware of. We can't be doing pilots that lead nowhere over and over again, because then we're not continuing to build out our product and we're not providing recurring value to our customers. And so, we've been fortunate that we've been able to manage that pretty well so far. So, we have lots of paying customers, and that helps, drive our revenue and development and that sort of thing, so that we can afford to do pilots. And then, keeping those pilots sort of scoped so that they're not dragging on for years is also important.
Going to the sort of the size of no, not the size. No, let's bring that back. You come from outside the industry, relatively speaking, sort of fresh eyes on it. I wanted to ask you what surprised you most about insurance that you didn't know on the way in. What was there anything that you just took you by surprise?
Yeah, so from a technology standpoint, I would say not so much. There are, I think, being so involved in the actuarial side of the house has given me some interesting insights into the way insurance companies operate that I might not have had before. And from an industry outsider perspective, it can be a little bit jarring sometimes to see how certain things operate. And I'll give you an example. So one is there are sort of entire products in the insurance industry that depend really heavily on the treasury rates, the US treasury rates. And if those are higher, those products get a lot of attention within the organization. But if the treasury rates fall really low, insurance companies will basically completely ignore entire asset classes and things like that, and stop working on that entirely, and that can have sort of ripple effects across the whole organization. So you can see suddenly at the sort of the drop of the hat, so to speak, they'll suddenly pivot and stop focusing completely on that product and start focusing on other products, which is really interesting to have something that's so heavily tied to certain market trends and things like that. And I wonder a little bit, I guess, if the Federal Reserve thinks about these things I'm sure they do. But these are the sorts of industries that get heavily affected by those changes in the market, which is really interesting.
I don't know. I think people try and avoid thinking about insurance.
Fair enough.
They leave it to people like us to worry about too much.
That's right.
I also wanted to get your view on kind of like, I've got this. I've got this thought process about the larger insurance carriers, and there's so many you could name that are 200 years old, or over at least over 100 years old. They've been around forever. They've done this, and they've reached such scale. Is there an incentive for a business to change if it's if they're incredibly profitable anyway? I don't know. Do you feel some of that from even outside of the insurance industry, but because you're trying to bring about change with your technology, you're trying to bring something in that hasn't changed in the 80s. Do you think that ever comes into it, or is that just one factor of which there are probably many greater factors?
Sure. Yeah. I do think that can happen in the insurance industry, and I think maybe it does happen sometimes. I guess I would warn insurance companies that that's a very dangerous mindset to get in, especially insurance can be a very profitable market. However, the margins are actually pretty low.
Sure.
So they're making a large amount of revenue on very small margins, right? So there's a lot of money moving around,
Yeah.
but what they're actually taking off the top is quite small with regards to the bigger picture. So, it's a dangerous mindset to be like, oh, we're super profitable, so we don't need to change. Because if that starts to trend in the wrong direction, things can pretty quickly get out of control. And I think you've seen some of this kind of even with playing around with new products and things. An abundance of overconfidence or something like that, where, for example, when long-term care products started to come out for the first time, it's my understanding that a lot of these ended up tanking and costing these companies a lot of money because they weren't modeled properly and they made some assumptions that were wrong. And it's gotten a lot better since then. But a lot of these initial products that rolled out ended up costing companies quite a bit of money. And that's a great example of where if you make one little mistake, it can have a ripple effect across the organization. And so I think that mistake could be doing nothing, right? And if you're not staying up to date with the technology, and it doesn't have to be this grand transition from older technology to new technology. Companies can take incremental approaches to this, and I'm of the opinion that that's the way it ought to be done, or that's the correct way to do it, so that you're not trying to do some huge lift every 10 years, but rather be constantly thinking about these things and how can we make small updates here and there to stay on top of the technology and the trends in the industry and that sort of thing. And to some extent, I think a lot of companies do okay at that. On the technology side, from my perspective, I think is where it tends to be lacking for the most part.
Yeah, I sort of see a trend of trying to paper over cracks, and I'd made an observation, and this is in no means a disrespect or kind of a negative comment towards tech teams within insurance companies, because again, that's a huge sweeping statement. And secondly, I just think they do different things. Most of the big incumbents, their tech teams are there as kind of maintenance rather than development and furtherment of tech. And that's just because they're trying to fix and deal with the stack that they've been left with. But therefore, that means that you've got different skill sets in those teams than you necessarily need for building kind of future tech, or at least kind of keeping on the cusp of things. Do you think that's fair? And do from a tech kind of point of view, from a CTO point of view, do you think insurance maybe needs to do something to kind of attract new talent or develop new talent because the skill sets don't seem to match?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is an area where a lot of the previous areas that we've already discussed around innovation can really help. So if you're really fostering or cultivating innovation in the industry, I think that alone can attract the right talent. Because if you look at the startups in the insurtech space, they've been very successful at recruiting good talent. Yeah. Even us, which I will put a shameless plug in, we're hiring right now. So anybody listening, yeah, definitely go to slopesoftware.com and check out our careers page. But yeah, I think that we're seeing that startups are able to recruit, and it has less to do with the fact that they're in the insurance industry and more to do with the fact that they're solving interesting problems.
Yeah.
And that's really, there are a lot of interesting problems to solve in the insurance space, way more than I thought before I actually entered it myself. And if you like to solve interesting problems, and you sort of cultivate that, I think you can recruit good people. And that's, I think, going to be key going forward to sort of avoid that mindset where you're just getting people to maintain your old software and really recruiting people that are excited to solve new problems.
Yeah, and I think that's what I see generally, even outside of kind of tech recruiting. The people I get talking to me that want jobs in insurtech is completely varied, and I do a lot of my work where I bring the kind of insurance professionals into the tech organizations. And it's kind of left me, slightly cynical, because I think it is just essentially, it's seen as more exciting. And I think that's where maybe incumbent carriers have a bit of a challenge, is to kind of make sure that they're shouting about the interesting work they're doing. Because look, it's easier probably to kind of make an impact on growing that margin that we talked about that was quite narrow on their profits, than it is to kind of get a new startup and make it something. It's much easier to add 2% on a, $1 billion balance sheet than it is to kind of like create a $1 billion company. But the journey and the story you telling and being a recruitment professional, I talk to people all the time. All I do is tell stories about why you should go and work for company A over company B. And the incumbents just have to do a slightly better job of telling their story. Whereas I think it's very easy to be a startup and kind of go, we're a startup, and all the kind of positive, excitement that goes with that. It's like people used to just be business owners, but everyone's an entrepreneur now. It's not, you're not. it's just repackaged, and it's a bit more exciting, because there's so many challenges to sort of go after, as you rightly say. I wanted to talk specifically about your software and what it does. So you kind of, I think you're going to answer this because I realize there's a good tagline on your website, but I've asked the question as I've written it anyway. But does kind of advanced modeling kind of risk making the current skills of actuaries obsolete? I know I've backpedaled from saying, does it risk making actuaries obsolete? Because I think that's a bit kind of abrasive. But do you think it changes? Does it risk making some of the actuarial skills obsolete as we get better with kind of modeling technology?
Yes, this is actually a really interesting question. And we actually get asked this a lot by people that are not in the industry. And so usually it's like, well, are actuaries even going to exist in 10 years? We get asked that all the time, right? Like, does your software replace actuaries and this sort of thing? And I think that the mindset around that is really taking for granted the expertise that actuaries have. And I think the best way to explain this is to talk about how hard it is to become an actuary. So, for example, like these people have very, very deep industry knowledge. I mean, they've basically dedicated their lives to be insurance experts. And a lot of times they also have a specialization. So they might be life insurance experts or P&C insurance experts. And to put this in perspective, on average, and you can find these numbers, it takes about 7 to 10 years to become a fully credentialed actuary, which is something like the Fellow Society of Actuaries, which is the society in the US. And that is roughly about 20,000 hours of work to do that. And I always like to reference Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers book in this, because he says it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert in something. And so on average, it takes an actuary 20,000 hours to become an expert in their field. So, I mean, these are experts among experts, right? And that is an expertise that goes beyond just math. These people are not just human calculators. They really know how to critically think about insurance and make good decisions. And they understand all of the ins and outs. And that's why they can model this stuff really accurately. And so, I think that while modeling technology is advancing, it's going to be a long way off before this role can be completely eliminated. Now, that being said, I think one of the challenges that this new technology does present is a lot of the types of modeling, especially around ML and AI, those sorts of modeling, the types of things that they're doing right now are a lot of times replacing the types of things that a junior level actuary would do.
Cool.
And if you're eliminating the things that the junior actuary does, then how do you get the actuarial folks cultivated into senior level actuaries if their job is basically being replaced? And I think that's more of the concern is how to properly train actuaries so that they can take advantage of ML and AI without eliminating all of the steps and the learning along the way to become real experts in the space.
That's a really interesting point, actually, that's not come up before when we've talked about, ML and AI stuff, because, we talk a lot about kind of getting rid of the mundane, and I've always saw that as a massive positive, because, the bits that people get excited about at work is when you get to apply your knowledge and you challenge yourself. So, as an actor, with the more challenging parts of the role, software development, even recruitment, the stuff that we like to do is the stuff that's a bit more challenging. If you remove that, there's that. How do you replace that? Because you earn your stripes doing the kind of mundane stuff in most jobs. Most jobs it's kind of going through things. It's the equivalent of the photocopying, so you can kind of read it as you go. And yeah, it again speaks to kind of the way that we're culturally changing as well. If you think about kind of remote working, someone's already mentioned that to me, that you don't have those kind of water cooler moments where you pick something up as well. So if you remove those kind of junior level roles, how do you replace that? I think that's a fascinating challenge, because we'll have a load of really good technology which still needs to be applied by an expert, but we've got no training for the experts to do. So
yeah, exactly. And it's a really, I don't know what the right answer to this problem is, but it's something that we've thought about. And I think it's something that will need to be addressed. So I think being able to maybe train more junior resources on what these models are actually doing is maybe now a separate exercise than actually doing it themselves, right? Because now you have these really advanced models and technology that might be replacing sort of that manual labor.
You've really posed me a sort of ponder there. That's something that I'm I'm really thinking about that now, because I'm selfishly thinking about my own industry and just how removed we're sort of being now. And there's a lot of stuff which is done online. Look, there's no getting away from the fact a lot of recruitment is tackled on LinkedIn, for example. But then the complaint is always that people don't know anything and they just keyword search. And like, the reason I know stuff is because I was working before LinkedIn existed, and I had to ask all the dumb questions. And I've probably done my 10,000 hours worth of interviewing people that work in insurance, and that's what's built the kind of knowledge base to enable me to operate at a higher level. But how do I do that for people coming into the industry if everything is kind of done in a kind of AI driven way, and the computer's sifting sort of data for you? And and I think that's a problem we're going to see across the industry as we kind of embrace technology. And I'm really conscious as well about people's enjoyment of work. I think that's something everyone likes to talk about. Oh, we have a fun work environment, but I don't know if we always think about creating jobs that are fun. And one of the benefits of AI and machine learning is you remove kind of mundane tasks. But I don't know, how do you create experts outside of that environment? So that's the topic I'm going to have on a separate podcast all in itself. But look, I'm conscious of your time as well. So it's been an exciting few weeks for you. Looking to raise some more money. Look, fingers crossed, it appears to be done. Is it? Can we say it's done, or are we saying it's nearly done, properly done?
By the time this podcast is released, it will definitely be done. Sure. We have everything committed. We're just doing paperwork, basically.
Yeah, no, fine. So what's the purpose of that, and what are you guys going to do with that investment? Where's that going?
Yeah, absolutely. So the main focus of this investment is really so that we can move up market a little bit and focus more on enterprise level clients. So there's a few features we would like to add to our platform that would really enable some of these larger enterprise clients that want specific features. If you think about like a lot of integrations and things like that around, single sign-on and APIs and things like that, so that they can automate, their workflows and not have to have human intervention in some aspects of their workflows. A lot of things like that we're really focused on, and so we're building up the development team, the product team, the quality assurance team, and the actuarial support team, all to help with these larger clients, which we're already landing these large clients, and we just felt like having the extra acceleration to help grow the team a little bit faster would put us in a better position long term to really support these as we grow. So.
Awesome, exciting stuff, an exciting time. And are you? I didn't ask this at the outset, but geographically, are you just focused predominantly on North American market, or is it international? What's the focus for you guys?
Yeah, it's actually a great question. I guess I didn't mention that in the other use of funds is we are expanding internationally. We are already an international company. We have a couple of clients outside the U.S., but we are trying to expand as well. And we've built out a lot of capabilities around IFRS 17 and those sorts of regulatory changes that are coming onto all these insurance companies' plates over the next few years. And so, yeah, we're looking to target internationally as well. And being a software as a service provider, that really enables us to do that a lot more easily than some of our competitors.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a really good place to end on. We like positive endings, so I'll probably wrap it up there. But Taylor, thank you so much for spending the time with us. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.